What I'd like to do now is to give you a free lecture, a free seminar on some very important legal issues. Now, if you were to go to a seminar which is being presented by a constitutional attorney, let's say, you would pay a lot of money. Now, I have been licensed to practice since 1986 in the state courts of California, also in the federal courts, also dealing with constitutional issues quite a bit. And so I'm going to give you this for free. Hopefully you appreciate that. But what we are seeing right now in the United States of America is of great concern. I went back to some of the previous updates, not too long ago, beginning in March, where we started talking about certain developments, and they have most certainly not gotten any better. The first one I want to talk about is the so-called Alien Enemies Act. Now, that is a basis on which people have been deported, people in the United States of America, whether they are legal here or not, they have been deported to other countries, in particular to El Salvador. Now, what is the Alien Enemies Act of 1798? We are quoting the act, and I'd like to quote you the wording. Of course, first of all, this act has only been used 3 times in times of war, and there's a reason for that, and has fallen into disuse because there hasn't been any of the original purposes. But the law says, whenever there is a declared war between the United States and any foreign nation or government, or any invasion or predatory incursion is perpetrated, attempted, or threatened against the territory of the United States by any foreign nation or government, and the President makes public proclamation of the event, all native citizens, subjects of the hostile nation or government being of the age of 14 years and upward, who shall be within the United States and not actually naturalized, shall be liable to be apprehended, restrained, secured, and removed as alien enemies. So reading this article for what it says, it's clear to me that this law is not even applicable at all. Because we do not have a situation where a war has been declared between the United States of America and any other country. In this particular case, they are saying Venezuela. No war has been declared. And so therefore, since this element is not even present, this law doesn't apply. Now, the interesting thing is that this was addressed by the courts, and they have not even decided on whether that law is applicable or not. All they have done, they have said, is, well, let's see whether the people have gotten enough due notice. So everybody has evaded the question, the most important question. The Supreme Court, the United States Supreme Court, was approached twice with this very question. And what did they do? As they usually do when they don't want to make a decision, they sidestepped the issue. The first one, they said, well, we are not addressing the issue whether this law is even constitutional or whether it was applied constitutionally. We are just talking about the fact that in this particular case, the plaintiffs, these were Venezuelan aliens, whether they chose the right venue for launching the lawsuit. And they said, no, they didn't. They filed a lawsuit in state X, and they should have filed a lawsuit in state Y. And so that's why all they said is, so therefore, we don't have to go into the issue whether this law is constitutional or not. And so PBS on April 8 wrote, the Supreme Court's ruling did not address the constitutionality of the act or the migrants' claim that they don't fall within the category of people who can be deported under the law, because they said, well, they just chose the wrong venue. And then on May 16, they came up with another decision in front of the Supreme Court on Friday. And they granted a request by Venezuelan nationals seeking to block the removal from the United States under the Alien Enemies Act in a 7-2 decision. They said, no, Trump cannot do that. But why couldn't they go into the question, is that act even valid? They didn't go into that. In fact, what they said is, oh, they didn't get enough notice. Those people didn't get enough notice, roughly 24 hours before removal. That's not enough, devoid of information about how to exercise due process. It also says very clearly, the justices barred the removal of the men. The justices did not rule on whether the Alien Enemies Act, which the Trump administration invoked in mid-April to deport the detainees, had been applied correctly. To be clear, we decide today that only the detainees are entitled to more notice than was given on April 18. So the point being, again, everything is uncertain. Nothing was decided. It's unfortunate that this is the typical modus operandi of the Supreme Court. Rather than putting the question to rest and say this act is not applicable in the case, which they should do. I mean, every way to look at the wording of this law would have to come to the conclusion it's not applicable. They don't want to go into the issue. Now, you all heard, I'm sure, about the situation where a judge now has been detained, arrested, because she allegedly helped an alien who evaded the FBI. Now, that's what you heard on the news, right? Here's this judge, and she didn't cooperate with the FBI, and now she is being charged with obstruction of justice and so on. Well, it's not quite that way, but it depends on who you listen to and what you read. Judge Andrew Napolitano, no stranger to many networks. I mean, he is being interviewed on Newsmax, he's being interviewed on Fox News, he's also appearing in other shows, very respected judge. He wrote on the Ron Paul Institute on May 1, Judge Hannah Dugan, that's the name of this judge, was presiding over an arraignment for a non-incarcerated defendant when her court officers told her that the feds were in the courthouse, in the hallway actually, seeking to arrest the defendant in her courtroom. And the feds were growing impatient. When she asked to see the arrest warrant, they had none. Instead of an arrest warrant issued by a judge, as the Fourth Amendment requires, they presented an administrative warrant in which one federal agent authorizes another to arrest a person in a public place. These administrative warrants are blatantly unconstitutional. The purpose of the 14th Amendment is to ensure that only judges order arrests. And then he concludes with the following warning, and that's part of the reason why I'm giving you this lecture. This is bigger than just Judge Dugan. We are witnessing an unprecedented assault on the separation of powers and the concept of federalism by a White House impatient with the constitutional process and largely indifferent to the role and function of the judiciary. Now, we all should know, and we have all learned it in school, we're all young people, there are three branches, right? The legislative, the judicial, and the executive. And they're all separate. And one branch is not allowed to usurp the authority of the other two. This is exactly what we are seeing happening right now. And that's why it's so critical that we understand what is going on. We have an article in the update of this week, dated by The Hill, dated May 9. It says, one of the most frustrating things about the Trump administration is that it offers too much nuttiness to process. Not long ago, the discovery that the president doesn't know what the Declaration of Independence is, he admitted that, would have consumed the country for months. Today, it barely registers because the Trump White House pumps out similar stories 2 or 3 times a week. And then here we have the extremely right-wing conservative White House advisor, Stephen Miller, who is not an attorney, I like to add this. And he announced now that the White House is looking into suspending habeas corpus because we are being invaded by foreign enemies. Now, before I go into habeas corpus and explain a little bit about what that is all about, let me just say this, that I not want to take too much time on the most recent situation where the former director of the FBI is being accused of having posted something on Instagram which has been talked about as potentially a criminal act. It has to do with, he walked at the beach, he says that he saw somebody having put together seashells, which then have created a number, 8647. Let me ask you, and of course, unless you heard about these things already and have read articles, prior to doing that, would you know what 8647 means? One person? One person. Well, you know, but you have already read those things and we talked about it. 8647. So 86 allegedly means assassination. 47 allegedly is referring to the President of the United States, Donald Trump. So allegedly, he was saying, okay, let's assassinate, let's kill Donald Trump. Well, he denies that. He said, absolutely not. That was not at all what he was implying to do. 86 is kind of looked upon as in the context of bars and restaurants. In other words, you go to a restaurant, you don't like the waiter. 86 means, okay, get me another waiter. Or you go into a bar and the bar owner says, I don't want this guy there. Get him out of here. That's how it's normally applied. Now, in social media, who knows what they all come up with, and 86 might very well have some meaning. Trump was interviewed. He said, oh, absolutely, that's what he meant. Every child in the United States knows that. Well, maybe I'm a grown-up child. I almost certainly didn't know that. I never would have made any association with that. But I'm bringing this up. Now, of course, if in the FBI circles people understand that 86 means assassination, that would be a different story, because, I mean, he is the former director of the FBI. But as I said, I was completely unaware of that. I would say probably the vast majority of people in the United States are totally unaware of that. But I thought that habeas corpus would be something every child would understand. But I was mistaken on that one too, because apparently that is not true either. Many don't know what it is. So let me just explain to you first of all what it is. Habeas corpus is Latin. It means having your own body, or you should have your own body, something like that. And it just means if you are incarcerated, if you are detained, if you are imprisoned, you have the right to see a judge, so that the judge can look into whether your incarceration is valid, is legal. So Mr. Miller is saying, do away with that. We don't need that. Nobody should have the right to do that. Now, I have another article by Judge Andrew Napolitano on May 15, where he goes into this a little bit, and this is what he says. What if the writ of habeas corpus has been guaranteed to the British since 1215 and to Americans since 1789? What if this encompasses a right of every person who is confined by the government against his or her will to compel the jailer to justify the confinement before a neutral judge? What if this right is personal and individual and applies to all persons at all times? What if the right can be exercised by anyone who is arrested? And then he gives some examples from history, when, for instance, Abraham Lincoln tried to suspend it, and the Congress said, no, can't do it. When Franklin Roosevelt actually tried to suspend it and used it as a basis for the anti-Japanese racial animosity in America. That's what the judge is saying here by detaining them. And of course, later the Congress said that was all wrong, and so the survivors have to be compensated. George W. Bush tried to suspend it after 9/11, and the Congress said, no, can't do it. You don't have the right to do it. And so then Napolitano ends by saying, what if here we go again? What if the White House announced last week that it, not Congress, is contemplating the suspension of habeas corpus, but only for certain persons? Of course, he puts it like, what if? I mean, this is exactly all what happened. And my comment is simple. Are we ever learning from history? And the answer seems to be no, we're not. We are bound to repeat it, and we are bound to repeat it, and if we are not waking up, we are moving towards an absolute dictatorship and an absolute authoritarian government. And what we are also moving towards is a separation in the country, which we have never experienced before since the Civil War. There's no question about it. There is no doubt about it. I got an interesting memo today from the California Bar Association. Now, since I am still an attorney licensed to practice, I'm part of the Bar Association. I have to be. You all have to be part of the Bar Association. I have to pay my yearly fees. But that's what they wrote. As many of you are aware, in recent weeks, the federal government has issued executive orders targeting law firms based on their representation of clients and positions unpopular with the current administration. Attorneys have an ethical duty to provide competent and diligent representation to clients regardless of how unpopular or controversial their causes may be. The State Bar reaffirms that all lawyers must be permitted to exercise their professional judgment and ethical duties without fear of reprisal. The State Bar encourages California attorneys, consistent with their oath to uphold the United States and California Constitution, to faithfully discharge their duties as attorneys, to speak out in support of the right to and availability of competent legal counsel to all, and of the rule of law. You know, the President of the United States also has sworn to uphold the Constitution, the division of power. There have been threats, many threats now by the administration towards law firms who have represented clients who took positions the Trump administration didn't like. Now, some of the law firms have buckled, have kind of entered into a quote-unquote settlement, and have said, okay, now we are going to now do something for Trump. We are now going to, represent clients or represent causes which are sympathetic towards Trump. Others have said, no way, and they sued, and all these suits are pending. Again, he even said we should disbar or start into impeach judges who have made decisions which he didn't like. And even the Chief Justice Roberts has said absolutely not, that is completely, totally out of the question. That's completely and totally unconstitutional. And that brings me to the next aspect, which is probably the most grave one of everything I've said so far. And this has to do with the restriction of birthright citizenship. Mr. Trump issued an executive order some time back. And a lot has been misrepresented when it comes to this order. And I've been reading reports, and that was wrong, and that was wrong, and that was wrong. And quite frankly, not too many are correct even, insofar as the executive order is concerned. Because in the executive order, he said, that only if you are born in this country, only if you are a child of an American citizen or a green card holder are you automatically an American. See, many times they suppress the green card holder, so that was included. So if you are born in this country and your parents are not, at least one of them, an American citizen or a green card holder, you are not entitled to and don't become automatically an American citizen. Now, of course, lawsuits have been filed by, I believe, 12 states by now, and they're all pending. And now it has reached the Supreme Court on May 15. Now let me read you the 14th Amendment. This is what it says. All persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof are citizens of the United States and of the state wherein they reside. So this is actually straightforward. Everybody who is born in this country, it doesn't talk about the legality as to why they are here, are automatically American citizens. But then the Trump administration says, yeah, but there's an exception. It says subject to the jurisdiction thereof. And they say if you are not an American citizen, you are not subject to the jurisdiction of the United States of America because your allegiance is with another country. Now, I've never heard a more stupid and ridiculous argument than that. Let's just take an example. So you are even an illegal alien. You're driving your car. You're driving over a stop sign, let's say, or go through a red light. You're being stopped by the police. They want to give you a ticket. You say, oh, no, wait a minute, no, you can't give me a ticket. I'm not subject to your jurisdiction. Guess what the judge and what the police are going to tell you. So that's number one. It's just a stupid argument. But it goes further than that. They say, oh, it's only limited to the slaves, to the black people. That was the reason for the Constitution. Well, there's nothing in the Constitution saying that. But the argument is also completely wrong because what about green card holders? That's why I brought that up. Green card holders still are citizens of another country. So where's their allegiance? So with that argument, they wouldn't be American citizens either. In other words, the children of at least a green card holder. What about those who are here legally? Students who are here on a student visa. Workers who are here on a work visa, which is for 2 years, for 4 years. So they are here working legally. They are getting engaged, getting married, have a child. Now that child is not an American citizen, based on that rationale, because they are somehow not subject to the jurisdiction. I mean, as some judges have said, and one actually who was appointed by Ronald Reagan, that is the most blatant, ridiculous argument they have ever heard. So the point being, this is all pending. 12 states have filed a lawsuit, and now they've found themselves in front of the Supreme Court. The interesting thing is they tried to avoid the issue of the birthright citizenship because they probably knew, that is Trump, they probably knew they probably would lose in front of the Supreme Court on that one because the Constitution is very clear. So they said, no, we're not coming to you because of that. We are coming to you because we want you to make a decision regarding those judges who have issued preliminary injunctions against this order nationwide. See, normally if you have a case and you have two parties, the judge would be able to make a preliminary injunction saying it's all pending a final decision, so this is not enforceable until the final decision is made. Normally you would do it only insofar as the parties are concerned. You wouldn't go beyond it. So in other words, you have a state. The state sues the government. The judge says, okay, insofar as these parties are concerned, insofar as that state is concerned, you cannot enforce the executive order. So here the judges, and there are several, have said, no, we are making a decision and we are applying it to the entirety of the United States, not just to the states which have filed lawsuits. And so the Trump administration is going to the Supreme Court saying, they can't do that. You have to restrict them to just the case at hand. And that is actually not an issue just limited to Trump. I mean, former presidents like Clinton and Obama have also had the same quarrel with those judges and their nationwide decisions. The problem is the Supreme Court judges in oral arguments said, yeah, but how in the world can we make that decision now? To say it's just limited to the states. So in other words, then we have 12 states, and in those 12 states, it cannot be enforced. In the other states, where there was no lawsuit filed, that can be enforced. Which means, if you belong to a state where it cannot be enforced, you will no longer be an American citizen. But if you belong to a state where the preliminary injunction was issued, you are still an American citizen. And the judges said, yeah, we can't do that. I mean, how can we do that? Now, one judge said, why in the world are we not making a decision now as to whether this whole idea to do away with the birthright citizenship is valid or not. But unusually, or I should say usually so, they don't apparently want to do that. So we have an unbelievable situation. You know, somebody's coming to the United States. They know which state has now a non-enforceable decision by the court or by Trump, and they say, okay, let's go there. And then we are going to have a child there, and he is an American citizen. Obviously, they wouldn't go to a state where right now they are saying it's enforceable. Can you see how much this is all dividing the country? It's obvious there should be a uniform presentation, a uniform decision. Now, the Supreme Court is in an absolutely catch-22 situation here. If they say, well, those injunctions are nationwide to be applied, they got a problem because, frankly, why should a judge be permitted to have an injunction insofar as one case is concerned, insofar as their parties are concerned, and say, oh, but I'm, doing that for the entire nation. On the other hand, if they say it's not going to be nationwide, and they don't say something about the birthright citizenship concept, they have a catastrophe on their hands. So either way, they have to make a decision. Now, as I said earlier, I cannot see how a decision could be made any other than saying the idea by Trump to do away with the Constitution when it comes to birthright certificates or birthright citizenship is just a baloneyous nonsense. I can't see how that can be made based on the law, but hey, stranger things have happened. We have said for years that we are expecting something like a civil war to break out again in this country. I wouldn't have thought it's based on what I have just represented to you. I thought it would have been on some other issues. But be it as it may, that's what we are facing. Many people apparently don't see it. They are looking at the outcome. They say, we want to have illegal aliens out of the country. And so, because that is the outcome which they want, and if they are criminals, nobody would actually argue against it, I would think. But then they come up with methods which don't justify the end. But they want to do it because that's what they want. They want the end to be reached. But if we do away with the law, if we do away with our system, if we do away with the Constitution, what do we have? Anarchy, dictatorship, and that is something I believe nobody really wants. But when it comes to that point, people may wake up and say, how did we ever get to this point? Well, because they didn't listen, they didn't watch, they didn't observe what's happening. They're listening to all the wrong propaganda. But this is where we are moving towards. And unless this is going to be stopped, and it has to be stopped by the Supreme Court, it could be stopped by Congress, but if they want to change the Constitution, they would have to have a two-thirds majority. They're never going to get it. But unless it's stopped and unless Trump can do what he is doing and his administration, it will get worse and worse in this direction. There may be lots of people who like Trump and what he is doing, but let's not forget the fact that what he is doing, it appears to me, is unconstitutional and illegal. And I hope that the Supreme Court ultimately makes that decision, and hopefully it makes it rather quickly.